welcome back. Let's add some items. All right, so a reminder about our CRUD methods here. What's going to happen is basically two stages, right? So we're going to be adding a method to our data adapter, right? That's going to be sort of the most important thing. We'll be interacting with the database and so on. And then if you remember, we commented out some code back in the activity that called those methods. Right, so essentially we're going to be sort of walking back and forth between our adapter and then our activity. And it may seem a little bit confusing since a lot of these methods are named very similarly, but sort of two different sides of things, right? So the interesting new stuff and then calling that new interesting new stuff, right? So let's start off with creation, right, in our add score method. So this is going to be one that we're going to write from scratch. Right. So let's do that. So I'm going to go into my data adapter, and let's see. So I have an open and a close method. I guess maybe between the two here, I'll write a method that is going to be public. It needs to be used by my other class here. I'm going to let this guy be along, return along, and I'll have it so that we return the ID of the one that we created. Don't really need to do that. But that's doesn't hurt to expose it. So add a score. So let's just say that we're passed in some sort of score that we want to add to the database, right? How would we go ahead and do that? So let's start off here by just returning some value so it stops complaining. All right. So to add a score, we have our database, and we said there's whole lots of things we can do with the database. So what would we do to add something, right? So adding is going to be insert. And insertion, as we see, is going to take a couple parameters here, right? So insert into which table. There's this null column hack. We're just going to pass in null for that guy. It even talks about this right here. They say it's optional. And then an actual row, which is going to be the content values, right? So if we're going to stub this in here, so insert, we need a table. Do you remember that we named that? We had a constant for that, just called table name. Here, null for the second parameter, and then the third one is the content values, which is going to be a row, right? Now that's too big. I'm going to have to create those. So I'm going to need a content values object here called row. Remember, this is just a single row in the table. Now I could build this up right here, but I'm going to choose instead to do a helper method for this guy, and I'm going to write one here called get content values from score, right? So if given a score, it's going to return a content values, and this is again, it's mostly for extensibility because this method could get fairly long if I had a lot of columns in my table. So let's go ahead and create that method. Private is fine, just a little helper method here. That looks good so far. So let's go ahead and create a content values here, and we will call the content values constructor, like so. And it's complaining. Let's go ahead and import content values. Much happier. And then I'm going to return that row. But before I do that, I'm going to have to add in all of the data from it, right? So this is where we're doing the work here. So row dot put, right? So this is just running off of key value pairs. So for each one, ID, name, and score would put them in there. Not exactly, right? So when I want to populate a content values for the sake of adding it, I do not want to add an ID, right? I have no idea where it's going to put it in there. I have no idea what ID it's going to use. So I'd leave that blank and it will be assigned for me. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the name. And where am I going to get it from? Well, I was passed in a score, so scores certainly have names. So hey score, go ahead and give me your name. And then the other one that we had was for the actual quiz score itself, and that's going to come from scores get score. All right, and again, not a big deal. I could have put this right in here inside this function, but sometimes we'll be writing ones that have a lot more in them. So just good habit to get into. Great, so I've made a row, and then I'm calling insert here. Now what do I want to return, right? I want to return the ID, right, of the thing here. So add a score to the database. Return the ID of the item that was added. Okay. You might wonder, well, where are we going to get that guy from? It's actually much easier than you might think, right? So insert, if we look at this guy here, returns along. Hey, let's take a look. All right, returns the row ID of the newly inserted row, or -1 if for some reason an error occurred. You know, the database wasn't open or so on. So we can even say that we do that too, or -1 in case of an error. All right, we're all exciting. Yes, we're exciting because we were able to just wrap around this guy, right? So, so the new ID is going to be returned by this guy. Note, and then I can just return the new ID. But before I do that, before I return it, there's actually one other thing I want to do. I want to keep my model object updated, so I can take the score here, and I can set its ID to be that new ID that was passed back from insert. Okay. The reason I do that is not so much that I really care about the ID when I'm displaying, but later on, if I want to do an update on it, I'm going to need to query for that ID so I know which score to update. All right, so keep it there. All right, so getting the slides caught up here, sort of this idea of having a method to get the content values from a score. When we populate it, we do not add an ID, right? Since it's going to be assigned. And then in my add score, when I actually, I get my content values and I insert it, it's going to return the ID of the row that I called new ID when I typed it in here. I'm going to set the ID as such, okay? And then I can optionally return it if I want to pass that back into to the calling function, okay? All right, so then what am I going to do? I'm going to call this guy, right, the add score. Remember, we're doing things in pairs. So we wrote this method. Now we're going to have to go into our list activity and call add score. And that's going to be super simple to do, right? I'm just going to say, hey, data adapter, the one that we constructed in onCreate, go ahead and add that score, all right? So I'm going to add in that single line back in my activity. So there's my score data adapter. Let's go ahead and find now the add score method. Add score data adapter, add score, and this parameter here was S, so I'm gonna pass that guy along. All right. We could run it, but there wouldn't be that much to see because again, we haven't done anything with viewing these guys, right? So we'll stop right there just because that's the first of our CRUD methods. All right, so C creation done. See you next time for a reading.